Tonight, we follow a trail the world was never meant to see. A story buried beneath monasteries, whispered through symbols, and written into the stones of Portugal itself. For centuries, history claimed the Knights Templar were destroyed, their banners burned, their leaders executed, their name erased. But what if that was only half the truth? What if they didn't die at all, but transformed, hidden beneath a new title, protected by kings, and reborn under another cross, the Order of Christ? From the fortress of Tomar to the windswept coast of Sagres, the same light burned on. Sailors carried their sigil across uncharted oceans, carving geometry into sea routes and prayers into stars. Churches became maps, maps became messages, and Portugal became the living archive of a brotherhood too dangerous to name. This isn't a tale of swords and crusades. It's the story of survival by secrecy, of how faith became navigation, and how one order turned exile into empire. Before you decide what to believe, look closer at the symbols etched above old doorways, the crosses on ships, the patterns in tile. Because the Templars may have lost their name, but not their vow. Like the video, subscribe, because tonight we follow the light of a brotherhood that never ended. The banners did not fall all at once. They sank like tired sails, the red cross fading into the dusk over Lisbon. It was the year 1312, and word had spread that the Pope himself had ended the Order of the Temple. In every corner of Europe, brothers were being arrested, questioned, and erased. But here, along the banks of the Tagus River, something different stirred. As the bells of Vespers faded, a quiet procession moved through narrow streets, carts loaded with sealed chests, monks in plain cloaks, faces hidden by hoods. No one spoke, no one prayed aloud. The city watched from shuttered windows as the most powerful knights in Christendom vanished into the night. They were not fleeing, they were transforming. Beneath the stone arcades of Lisbon, the last master of the Templars in Portugal met with a man few would dare oppose, King Dinis. The king was clever, pragmatic, and cautious. He understood that power did not need to disappear, only to change its name. And so, while France burned its Templars alive, Portugal prepared a quiet miracle. The brothers would survive, hidden behind a new order, a new vow, not of the temple, but of Christ. The Order of Christ. It was a sanctuary, wrapped in legality, a disguise made holy by royal ink. Outside the city, on the road to Tomar, torches flickered against the hills. That road had seen the rise of kingdoms and crusades, but never such silence. The knights rode without banners now, their shields plain, their armour dulled with dust. Yet within their silence pulsed something unbroken, an oath older than any crown. Some said they carried relics, others said secrets, but what they truly carried was memory. The fortress at Tomar waited for them. It had always been more than stone. Its walls were layered with symbols, its corridors built for prayer and concealment. As dawn touched the horizon, the caravan reached its gates. The brothers dismounted, knelt, and crossed themselves, not in despair but in defiance. The world thought them finished, but they were only beginning a second life. Inside the chapel, candles burned low. The Grand Master placed his sword on the altar, whispering words that no one recorded. Behind him, younger knights repeated his gesture, one by one, until the air shimmered with silent vows. Outside, the first light of morning painted the cross of Tomar in gold. It was smaller now, humbler, but alive. Lisbon's streets woke to rumours of disappearances, of ships leaving without banners, of manuscripts sealed and carried to unknown monasteries. And somewhere beyond the reach of the Inquisition, a new charter was being written, not retreat, not defeat, but translation, a transformation from knights to guardians of a different frontier. The order had vanished from sight, but not from the world. In secret corridors, the Templar fire still burned, waiting for the moment when the world would again need its light. In the year 1314, when the ashes of the Templars still drifted across Europe, a king in Portugal was writing letters that would change their fate. His name was Dinis, a man known as the Farmer King, poet, scholar, and strategist. He ruled not with swords but with symbols, understanding that the right seal could achieve what no army could. While France hunted the knights as heretics, Dinis studied the papal decrees carefully. He saw the loophole, the narrow space between obedience and defiance. The Church had ended the order of the Temple, yes, but it had not destroyed the idea of an order itself. And so the king did something no one else dared. He asked for permission to create a new one. The name would be different, but the souls beneath its mantle would be the same. The Order of Christ. The request reached Rome slowly, carried by couriers who knew how to disappear among pilgrims and merchants. When it arrived, Pope John XXII hesitated. Portugal was far, quiet, and loyal. There were bigger fires to fight in France and Italy. So, with a careful sigh and a stroke of ink, he approved it. The papal bull was signed in the year 1319. Overnight, the Templars of Portugal were reborn. Their white cloaks were folded away, replaced by new robes marked with a crimson cross, its arms curved gently like a flower. The design was subtle but meaningful. It carried within it the memory of the old symbol, the blood and the faith, hidden beneath a softer name. King Dinis welcomed them publicly, calling them servants of God and defenders of the realm. Privately, he spoke to their Grand Master and reminded him of the true vow: protect the knowledge, preserve the code, never let the light go out. The fortress at Tomar became their sanctuary again, no longer a Templar stronghold, but now the Sacred Heart of the Order of Christ. The transformation was elegant and invisible. What had been forbidden was now sanctified, what had been hunted now blessed. Across Europe, kings and priests whispered in confusion. How had Portugal managed this trick? The answer was simple. Dinis had not hidden rebellion. He had disguised it as faith. Inside the convent walls, the brothers carried on their work. They studied the stars, mapped the rivers, and recorded the histories others tried to burn. Their rituals continued, quieter but unchanged. The same prayers, the same oaths, spoken in candlelight where no one could hear. Some of the younger knights asked if their mission had changed, if they were still Templars. The elders smiled. A name is just a door, they said. The vow remains the same. Outside, the people of Tomar saw no difference. The bells still rang, the banners still fluttered, and the riders still left at dawn on errands no one explained. But those who listened closely swore the wind carried a new whisper through the arches, an old promise dressed in a new name, and the echo of that promise would shape the destiny of Portugal for centuries to come. At the centre of Portugal, surrounded by rolling hills and olive groves, stands Tomar, a fortress that breathes like a living cathedral. Its stones hum with memory, carrying whispers from the time when banners of the Red Cross flew from its towers. Long after the world believed the Templars were gone, their fortress remained, renamed and sanctified under the Order of Christ. Yet to walk its corridors is to feel a presence older than any title, as if the walls themselves still remember. Step inside the Convento de Cristo, and the air shifts. The sound changes, soft and deep, like a heartbeat beneath the floor. Light falls through narrow windows in perfect geometric angles, striking carvings that seem to move when no one looks directly at them. The centerpiece of it all is the Charola, the round church, modelled after the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. It is an 8-sided rotunda, each column sculpted with saints, angels, and cryptic symbols. The number 8 was sacred to the Templars, representing rebirth and eternity, and here it became their hidden signature. When the papal decrees forced them to vanish, Tomar became their memory palace, a cipher built in stone. Every arch hides a meaning, every shadow a secret. Above the altar, painted panels shimmer with gold leaf. At first, they tell simple stories of Christ and his apostles, but beneath the brushwork lies something else. Patterns of stars, grids of circles, and strange flowers that appear again and again. Historians call them decoration. The brothers called them guidance. To the untrained eye, the charola is only beautiful. To those who knew the code, it was a map. Stairways wind up and down through the fortress, turning unexpectedly, leading to locked doors and forgotten rooms. Some lead nowhere. Others lead to silence, so complete it feels like a prayer. The monks of the Order of Christ used these corridors to hide scrolls and relics that might have condemned them if discovered. Even now, restorers find symbols etched behind plaster, faint marks shaped like compasses, stars, and circles within circles. It is said that when the moon is full, a shaft of light enters the charola and lands precisely on a small carving near the altar, the same carving found in Templar ruins across Europe. A link, not erased, but hidden, connecting the forbidden past to the living present. Outside, the fortress is ringed by cloisters and towers, each one aligned with mathematical precision. The convento was built for more than worship. It was an instrument, a calendar, a compass that pointed not to north, but to faith. Generations of masons added layers to it, yet the foundation remained untouched, guarded. When the wind moves through its arches, it carries a faint resonance, almost a voice. Locals call it the echo of the Knights, the sound of prayers still circling through the stone. In Tomar, the Templars may have lost their name, but not their echo. It is still there, folded into the rhythm of light and shadow, waiting for anyone who dares to listen. From the outside, the charola of Tomar looks like a fortress wrapped around a secret. But step through its heavy doors, and you enter something far older than Portugal itself. The round walls rise like a drum, echoing the holy design of another temple far away, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. It is no coincidence. The Templars had built this shape before, in lands soaked with desert light, and when they came west, they carried Jerusalem with them in stone and spirit. The round church was their reminder of the sacred centre of the world, the place they had sworn to protect. But when the East was lost, they did not abandon it. They rebuilt it here, in Tomar, hidden behind Portuguese hills. To walk its circle is to trace the echo of the holy city itself. The columns are tall and close, each one carved with faces both angelic and human. Between them, gold-leafed panels shimmer in candlelight, showing saints, martyrs, and knights kneeling before an unseen presence. The architecture seems to hum with geometry. 12 columns, 8 sides, 4 doorways, all numbers that the Templars treated like scripture. Their builders were not just masons. They were mathematicians of the sacred, encoding their lost Jerusalem into every curve and angle. In the center stands the altar, a small imitation of the tomb of Christ, not in marble but in light. When sunlight filters through the high windows, it strikes the altar at an exact angle that mirrors the Holy Sepulchre's dawn alignment on Easter morning. That is not accident, it is design. It is devotion turned into architecture. The Templars called their mission the defense of the temple, but perhaps the true temple was this geometry, this hidden mirror of the divine. To them, building was worship. Every wall carried intention, every joint a prayer. When the order was destroyed and reborn as the Order of Christ, the charola became their silent cathedral. They could no longer journey to Jerusalem, so they made Jerusalem come to them. Historians now call it a copy, a curiosity of medieval architecture. But look closer, and you see something else. The charola was not imitation, it was translation. It turned the unreachable into the eternal. A temple that could travel, that could outlive empires, that could hide holiness inside a new world. Outside, pilgrims still climb the path to Tomar, unaware that they are walking through the shadow of two cities, one seen, and one remembered. The round walls hum in the evening air, their design whispering across centuries. A circle that never ends, a faith that refuses to die. In this place, the East never truly fell. It was carried west, built anew in stone and silence, a portable Jerusalem hidden inside the heart of Portugal. Stand in the charola at Tomar and look down. Beneath the gold and shadow, beneath the whisper of candle smoke, the floor itself begins to speak. Its tiles form strange patterns, circles within circles, points connected by invisible lines. To most visitors it is decoration, but to those who study geometry and the ancient art of alignment, it is a map, not of cities or roads, but of stars. For centuries, people have noticed that Tomar does not stand alone. Its position in the Ribatejo region is mirrored by other fortresses, Almirol and Monsanto among them. Each sits upon a hill, each built or rebuilt by Templar hands, each connected by lines that, when drawn on a map, form shapes that resemble constellations. From the air, the pattern begins to emerge. Tomar at the centre, Almirol to the south upon its river island, like a stone rising from water, and Monsanto to the northeast, carved directly into living rock. The angles between them match the angles between stars in the constellation of Orion, the hunter. The same constellation the Templars associated with Osiris, resurrection, and divine order. Coincidence, perhaps, but within the charola, the floor patterns echo those same angles, as if the earth itself were mirroring the heavens. Some historians dismiss these alignments as imagination, but too many details line up too neatly. The distances between the sites correspond to sacred ratios used in medieval cathedrals. The walls of Almirol face sunrise on the spring equinox. Monsanto's central tower points almost perfectly to the North Star. These were not mistakes. The Templars built with intention, guided by astronomy as much as by faith. They believed that harmony between heaven and earth brought one closer to God. Tomar, Almirol, Monsanto, 3 fortresses, 3 stars, forming a trinity of light and stone. Within Tomar, the floor tiles show a similar trinity, a pattern of 3 circles overlapping, known as the vesica piscis, a symbol of creation and balance. Some believe the knights designed their forts to mark energy lines, veins of the earth where divine and natural power intertwined. Others see them as messages, left for those who could read the geometry. When night falls over Ribatejo, the connection becomes clearer. The towers of Almirol reflect starlight in the river's dark surface, and from Tomar's highest window you can trace the same formation in the sky. It is as if the knights wanted their map to be read twice, once by sunlight on stone, and once by starlight in reflection. Even today, surveyors walking the old paths find strange carvings in boundary stones and chapels, small 5-pointed stars and compass roses etched by unknown hands. They mark the same lines, the same geometry, stretching across hills and valleys. A terrestrial constellation, a secret geography. In the end, the map on the floor of Tomar was not about distance. It was about direction, pointing beyond walls and kingdoms, reminding those who followed that heaven and earth were once the same design, drawn together by faith, by light, and by the hands of the order that refused to fade. Symbols have long been the language of silence, and in Portugal, that language was written not in words, but in emblems, carved into stone, woven into robes, and painted onto sails. After the Templars vanished in the early 14th century, their cross did not disappear. It changed colour, shape, and meaning, sliding quietly from outlawed order to royal banner. The red cross of the Templars became the cross of the Order of Christ, bright crimson against white, now stitched onto the flags of ships that would one day circle the globe. To the world, it was a Christian emblem of conquest and discovery. To those who remembered, it was something older, the mark of a vow that had never been broken. The Templar cross was simple geometry, 4 arms equal, joined at the centre, a symbol of balance between heaven and earth. When King Dinis reformed the order, he kept that symbol alive, renaming it and folding it into the crown's identity. Over time, new signs joined it, creating a hidden code of lineage and belief. Among them was the armillary sphere, a ringed model of the cosmos that would become Portugal's royal insignia. To most it symbolized exploration and the age of discovery, but its roots reached deeper, back to the Templar fascination with the stars and divine order. The overlapping rings of the sphere mirrored the circles once carved into the floor of Tomar, a model of heaven's architecture made visible. When Prince Henry, later known as the Navigator, revived the Order of Christ in the 15th century, he carried these symbols as more than decoration. They were compasses of faith. Every ship that left Sagres bore the cross on its sails and the sphere on its maps, carrying the invisible legacy of the Templars across the oceans. Even the royal crest of Portugal began to echo this secret inheritance. The blue shields, marked by 5 smaller ones in a quincunx pattern, represented not just the 5 wounds of Christ, but the geometric perfection that Templar architects revered. The bees, though rarer, appeared in embroidery, tapestries, and mosaics from that era, delicate and deliberate. To the Templars, the bee had once meant resurrection and divine order, and its return in royal art was a whisper that the sacred lineage had not been forgotten. These emblems were not random flourishes of style. They were codes, passed through centuries of royal heraldry, preserved in plain sight. In Lisbon's Jerónimos Monastery, carved on the arches, you can still find the cross and the sphere entwined, a symbol of earth and heaven united by geometry and faith. The same combination appears on royal tombs, coins, and ship prows, repeated again and again like a quiet vow. The world remembers them as marks of empire, but in truth they were messages of survival. Through symbols, the Templars became eternal. Their ideas migrated from battlefields to banners, from armour to art, carried by kings and explorers who may never have known the full meaning. Yet the language of the cross, the bee, and the sphere remains, whispering of a brotherhood that refused to fade, its secrets hidden forever in the folds of royal velvet. The wind along the southern coast of Portugal smells of salt and iron, sharp and ancient. Here, at Sagres, the land falls into the sea like the edge of the world, and in the 15th century it became the heart of a quiet rebirth. Prince Henry, the man history calls the Navigator, stood where knights once knelt and raised his gaze not toward Jerusalem, but toward the horizon. He was not only a prince, he was Grand Master of the Order of Christ, heir to a secret older than his crown. The red cross that had once marked Templar banners now adorned the white sails of caravels. What had once been a crusade of the sword had become a crusade of stars. Henry's fortress at Sagres was not a castle. It was a monastery by the sea, a place where monks and sailors studied side by side. Maps were drawn like prayers, compasses set like relics, and every voyage began with the sign of the cross. The men who sailed under him wore the insignia of the Order of Christ on their chests, believing they carried light into the unknown. But light is never simple. To some, the voyages were missions of discovery. To others, they were acts of redemption, attempts to find the lands whispered about in ancient texts, perhaps even to recover the lost knowledge of the Templars. The caravels themselves became moving monasteries, their decks filled with prayer and calculation. The rhythmic turning of the compass became a kind of rosary, each bearing etched with meaning. At night, when the sea stretched endlessly in blackness, sailors traced constellations and saw the cross of the Order mirrored in the stars above them. Henry believed navigation was divine geometry, the same sacred math that had shaped the round church of Tomar and the star-shaped forts of the Ribatejo. To him, to master the sea was to understand the mind of God. The sailors who followed him carried that same quiet faith, though few understood its full origin. Under Henry's guidance, Sagres became a place of learning, of instruments and dreams. Astrolabes glimmered like relics, and maps spread across tables looked like holy manuscripts. Every voyage pushed the boundary of the known world, but each also traced a spiritual map, expanding not only geography but belief. The Templar vow of exploration and protection had found new form, and though the Pope himself blessed their missions, the order still carried its deeper silence. What had been forbidden knowledge in the 14th century became sacred science in the 15th. When caravels left Sagres, their sails glowing red with the cross of the order, they were not just ships. They were temples adrift, carrying a faith built on compass points and starlight. Prince Henry's legacy was not only empire, it was transformation. Under his hand, the crusade became cosmic, and the sea became the new cathedral. The monks had found their monastery again, this time made of wind and wave, endless and eternal. The maps of the 15th century were not just tools of navigation. They were stories, secrets, and warnings drawn in ink and salt. Spread across the tables of Sagres, they gleamed under candlelight like windows into forbidden worlds. These maps, called portalans, were hand-drawn charts of the seas, their coastlines traced with care and mystery. Every inlet and cape was marked, but so were things that no sailor could ever prove. Along the edges, in red ink, came the whispers of danger. Here be dragons. There the sea swallows ships whole. In the corners, artists painted sea serpents with curling tails, mermen clutching tridents, and angels blowing winds from the corners of the compass rose. But hidden among these vivid warnings were markings only a few could read. The brothers of the Order of Christ knew where to look. Between the lines of longitude and the curling coastlines, a monogram appeared, small and almost invisible, a cross within a circle within another cross. It was not decorative, it was a signal. It told those who knew that this chart was blessed by the Order, that its roots were trusted and its bearings true. To the uninitiated, it was nothing. To the navigator, it was sanctuary in ink. The maps bristled with strange geometry. Compass roses bloomed like flowers, each petal a direction, each line stretching outward across oceans that most believed impassable. The scribes who drew them were both artists and initiates. Some were monks who had once studied in Tomar, men who whispered prayers as they drew coastlines, believing that to chart the unknown was a sacred act. Each line drawn across the parchment was a vow of courage, each name of a port written like a verse. And yet, beyond the beauty, there were warnings. Margins filled with cryptic symbols, red crosses where ships had vanished, suns drawn half-set over invisible horizons. Some maps carried words in Latin, almost erased, that translated to forbidden winds. They spoke of currents that pulled ships toward lands unnamed, of tempests that came without warning, and of stars that moved when they should not. Sailors feared these marks, but the Order studied them. They believed the earth itself was alive with divine patterns, that every storm, every shift in wind, revealed hidden order. The maps were not merely guides, they were dialogues with the world, records of both danger and destiny. As voyages grew longer, new portalans arrived in Sagres, stitched together with scraps of older charts, forming a living manuscript of exploration. Some bore faint stains of seawater and ash, proof that they had travelled far. When Prince Henry's captains prepared to leave port, they would kneel before these charts as if before an altar. They traced the hidden monogram with their fingers, then folded the parchment with care. Outside, the wind waited, patient and knowing. The maps of forbidden winds would lead them where no one else dared to go, into the edge of mystery itself, guided not only by stars, but by symbols meant for brothers alone. Beneath the quiet cloisters of Tomar, under arches that echo with the slow drip of centuries, lies a place few have ever seen. The Claustro de Santa Barbara looks ordinary at first glance, a courtyard of stone and shadow, but those who know the Order's history speak of a sealed door hidden beneath its tiles, a door that opens not to tombs, but to memory. They call it the Vault of Tomar. Legends say it was built at the end of the 14th century, when the old Templar archives were broken apart and scattered. What remained was gathered here, beneath the fortress of the Order of Christ, hidden from kings, popes, and the passing of time. No bones rest in this vault. The reliquaries it guards are made not of silver, but of parchment. Knowledge itself became the relic. Monks of the order would descend by torchlight into the chamber, carrying scrolls wrapped in oilcloth and bound with wax seals. They wrote in Latin, Greek, and the strange coded script that had once belonged to the Templars. These were not ordinary texts. They were manuals of navigation, records of geometry, treatises on the movement of stars, and chronicles of the temple in Jerusalem. Some claimed the writings contained fragments of the lost Templar rule, altered to hide what could no longer be spoken aloud. The vault was built like a labyrinth. Narrow corridors led to small rooms lined with shelves of oak and cedar. The air was cool and dry, preserved by design. The builders understood the science of preservation long before it had a name. Even the light was controlled, entering only through thin slits at certain hours, enough to illuminate but never enough to destroy. The walls bore no decoration except for a single emblem, repeated again and again, a cross surrounded by a circle and 7 small stars. Scholars who later studied drawings of the vault believed the 7 stars represented knowledge to divine truths meant to remain hidden until the world was ready. During times of war and invasion, the vault became a sanctuary for documents that would have been burned elsewhere. Monks disguised their entries as religious accounts or agricultural records. Behind plain covers lay diagrams of celestial mechanics and coded correspondence between distant brotherhoods. Some say that even after the order's official end, select initiates continued to guard it in silence. When the Inquisition came to Portugal, the door was sealed for good, but legends persist that inside, beyond dust and darkness, the parchments still wait. Every few decades, explorers claim to have found signs of hidden passageways in Tomar, stairways that end abruptly, walls that sound hollow when struck, yet no one has broken the seal. The vault remains in shadow, protected by secrecy and reverence. To the world, it is myth. To the brothers who built it, it was immortality through knowledge. Tomar's greatest treasure was never gold or relics of saints. It was understanding, hidden deep in stone, where faith and reason met, waiting for the day it would be found again. In the dim light of a stone cell in Tomar, a single monk bends over a parchment covered in ink and calculation. His name is lost to history, though some call him Brother Duarte. He is both cartographer and heretic, though he never meant to be either. Before him lies a chart that looks at first like a map of the heavens, but on closer inspection it is also a calendar. He has drawn lines that cross the earth and sky alike, linking sacred feast days with solar eclipses, aligning holy time with cosmic rhythm. In his mind, navigation and faith are the same pursuit, both attempts to locate oneself within creation. But to the guardians of orthodoxy, what he is doing borders on blasphemy. It is the year 1439, and the problem of longitude has begun to haunt explorers. Latitude can be found by the sun, but longitude, the east and west of the world, remains elusive. To find it is to measure time itself, a power once reserved for God. Yet Duarte believes the key lies in the heavens. He charts not just stars, but feast days, solstices, eclipses, and tides. He finds patterns where others see coincidence. Easter, he notes, always dances close to a full moon. The Annunciation coincides with an ancient equinox. Every sacred day, he realizes, hides an astronomical truth. He begins to wonder if the church calendar was built not by accident, but by design, a coded map of time that reflects the movement of the cosmos. So he draws, quietly, in candlelight. His tools are simple: a compass, a quill, and faith. Each line he traces feels like a prayer, each number a confession. To him, this is not rebellion, it is worship. The world, he writes, is a liturgy written in light, but word spreads through the monastery. Some brothers whisper that he has turned divine mystery into mathematics. Others warn that the Inquisition still watches. The prior of Tomar, sympathetic yet cautious, orders his work hidden. But before it can be sealed away, one of Duarte's charts reaches Sagres. There, Prince Henry's scholars study it in silence, realizing its brilliance. The chart does not give longitude perfectly, but it gives something greater. It links faith and navigation. It proves that the rhythms of heaven can guide the paths of men. In later centuries, when sailors cross oceans, guided by stars and clocks, few will remember the monk who first dared to draw time as holy geometry. But the idea endures. Even now, in Tomar's archives, a single fragment remains, a corner of parchment with faint ink lines intersecting at the words Deus lux mundi, God, light of the world. Brother Duarte was never condemned. He was simply forgotten, his maps hidden among safer prayers. Yet his heresy lives quietly in every compass and calendar. In every moment, a sailor looks up to the stars and whispers a prayer for direction, believing that heaven still speaks to those who listen. Far out in the Atlantic, where the ocean breathes in long, slow rhythms, a cluster of emerald islands rises from the mist. Madeira, they call it, the Wood Island, though to the men of the Order of Christ it was something more. They called it the Rose in the Sea. To most, it was a frontier, a new land for vineyards and sugar, a place where the world could begin again. But beneath the hum of industry and the sweetness of harvest, Madeira became something quieter, stranger, and sacred. When Portuguese explorers first stepped onto its dark soil in the early 15th century, they marked the land with crosses and prayers. The Order of Christ claimed it not for kings, but for faith disguised as empire. They built their chapels before their homes, always facing east, their doors opening toward Jerusalem even across an ocean they did not yet understand. The geometry of Tomar followed them here. The fields of sugarcane were laid out in grids that mirrored the cloisters back home. At the center of every plantation rose a small oratory, whitewashed and silent, its doorway framed by the red cross of the order. To a passerby, it was simple devotion. To those who knew, it was a continuation, a secret monastery blooming in exile. These chapels were aligned with precision. When the sun rose on certain feast days, its light entered through narrow slits, touching the altar in patterns that echoed the charila in Tomar. Even the hills seemed chosen by unseen hands. From above, the island's chapels formed shapes that mirrored constellations, a sky mapped onto earth once more. At night, the brothers gathered in silence, their prayers mixing with the wind that carried the scent of the sea and sugar. They were no longer knights, yet they lived by the same rhythm, the same code. Their swords had turned into compasses, their fortresses into farms. But in their hearts, the vow remained unchanged, knowledge preserved, faith guarded. The Atlantic stretched before them like a new holy land, and Madeira became their rehearsal hall for something larger. Here they learned to tame storms, to read stars beyond known charts, to build in harmony with earth and light. Hidden deep within the laurel forests stood one oratory, known only by legend, carved into rock and facing east across the waves. Locals called it the Chapel of the Dawn. They said its altar stone came from the ruins of a Templar commandery brought secretly from Portugal. On the morning of the equinox, light poured through its single window and struck the cross carved into the wall, glowing red like fire. To the brothers, it was proof that the line from Jerusalem had not been broken, only bent across the sea. Madeira was their garden of renewal, a place where faith and geometry bloomed again, far from the eyes of Rome, a rose in the sea, rooted in silence, growing toward the Sunday. When dawn rose over the harbour of Lisbon in the year 1497, the sails of Vasco da Gama's fleet caught the first light like wings of white fire. Upon them blazed a symbol older than empire, the crimson cross of the Order of Christ. To most, it was the mark of Portugal's glory, a sign of divine favour guiding the age of discovery. But to the few who knew its true origin, it was something quieter and far more sacred. The Red Cross had once marked the cloaks of knights who vanished under papal condemnation. Now it rode the wind once more, this time across the oceans. The Templars had been soldiers of the Holy Land. Da Gama and Cabral were their inheritors, monks of the tide, carrying the same vow to the edge of the world. The decks of their ships were not battlefields but sanctuaries. Morning began with prayer, bells ringing softly against the rhythm of the sea. The navigator's astrolabe became a relic, the compass, a holy instrument, each movement guided by faith as much as by mathematics. To the sailors, the world was opening. To the order, it was remembering. When the caravels left the Tagus, they were not just leaving home. They were reenacting an older exodus, crossing water in search of a promised land. As they sailed south past Madeira and Cape Verde, they followed stars that had once been charted by the monks of Tomar. The sky above them was the same celestial map painted on the ceilings of the round church, the same geometry, the same design. The sea was now their cloister, endless and unbroken, its tides keeping the rhythm of ancient prayer. Even the sound of the wind through the rigging carried an echo of chant. When Da Gama reached the shores of Calicut, his first act was not conquest but offering. A chapel was raised from ship timbers, its altar carved with the cross of the order. Far across the world, the emblem of the Templars returned to the east, as if the circle had closed. Pedro Alvarez Cabral carried the same cross when he sailed west in 1500 and reached the shores of Brazil. The crimson mark that had once been outlawed now claimed continents. Yet beneath the triumphant trade, there remained a silence, a reverence that few understood. The order had transformed itself so completely that the world forgot its origins. But on those white sails, painted in red that glowed under the sun, the truth endured. Every voyage became a litany, every harbour a chapter in a sacred book written by wind and salt. And when the fleets returned, their decks heavy with spices and gold, the monks of Tomar rang their bells in rhythm with the tides, knowing that the vow made centuries before, in a temple of stone, now lived upon the ocean itself. The cross had not faded, it had simply learned to move. At the bend of the Tagus River, where mist gathers in the early light, stands the castle of Olmerol. It rises from an island of stone, like a memory that refuses to fade. Once a Templar stronghold, its towers have watched centuries drift by, their purpose forgotten by all but rumour. Yet, in the late 16th century, a flood changed everything. When the waters receded, they left behind debris, fragments of wood, and among them, a sealed chest half buried in the mud near the castle's base. Inside were relics too fragile to touch, among them a small leather-bound missal, its pages stiff with age. At first it seemed like a simple book of prayers, but beneath its hymns and blessings lay something stranger. The text had been written, scraped away, and written again. It was a palimpsest, one message buried under another. As scholars began to study it, faint traces of older ink appeared under the Latin psalms. The words were not prayers, but rules, written in a familiar rhythm. They were the lost statutes of the Knights Templar, redrafted for a new world. In the margins, diagrams of ships replaced swords. Where once the code had spoken of fortresses, now it spoke of caravels and trade routes. The vows of obedience and poverty had been reinterpreted as the discipline of navigation and fair exchange. The brotherhood, it seemed, had adapted its soul to survive. The handwriting suggested it had been rewritten in the early 14th century, when the order was dissolving in Europe, but reborn in Portugal as the Order of Christ. Hidden within the missal, phrases appeared in cipher, short Latin mottos using numerical keys tied to star positions. One line stood out: Servare per me quod amissimus in terra. To preserve by sea what we lost on land. The idea was clear. The mission of the Templars had not ended. It had simply shifted. The river itself became their wall. The ships became their sanctuary. Merchants and mariners took the place of knights and chaplains. Beneath the thin gold leaf of its illuminations, sketches of coastal maps emerged. Each was drawn with the same geometry once found in Templar chapels. Almirol, Tomar, and Lisbon were connected in precise alignment, forming a triangle that mirrored a constellation. It was not merely faith disguised as trade, it was faith transformed into movement. The missal, now called the Codex of Almirol, disappeared soon after its discovery. Some say it was taken to Tomar and sealed in the vault. Others believe it was destroyed to prevent controversy. But a few copies of its pages remain, traced by hand by those who understood their worth. In them, the voice of the old brotherhood still whispers. The rules that once guided warriors now guide wanderers. And in the soft hum of the river that flows beneath Almirol's walls, it is easy to imagine that the words still live, carried on the current, a code written not in ink, but in survival. In the summer of 1494, two nations sat at a table and divided the world. The Treaty of Tordesillas, written in ink and sealed by the Pope, drew a single line down the map of the Atlantic, granting Portugal everything to the east and Spain everything to the west. To most it was politics disguised as faith, empire wrapped in theology. But to the brothers of the Order of Christ, that line meant something more. They saw it not as a boundary, but as a prophecy, a meridian carved through destiny. The world, once whole, was now split by a stroke of a quill. And in that split, they saw a sign of divine geometry. For centuries, the Templars had studied the power of lines, from the alignments of their churches to the stars above Jerusalem. The world to them was a design, not chaos. So when a papal decree drew an invisible border across oceans, they did not see diplomacy, they saw pattern. They believed the meridian of Tordesillas mirrored something ancient, a balance between light and shadow, between old world and new. In Tomar, the scholars of the order gathered to study the charts. The line, they noted, fell close to the longitude that aligned with the sunrise over the Holy Sepulchre on the day of the spring equinox. To them, this was no coincidence. It was a message hidden in the turning of the world. The brothers whispered that God had divided the earth to test man's wisdom, that the true heirs of the temple must walk between the halves and heal them. While kings argued over trade routes and gold, the order looked deeper. They believed the line foretold a new crusade, not of swords, but of knowledge, spreading light across both sides of the world. In secret, they marked maps with their own version of the division, not as a boundary, but as a bridge. From Sagres to Madeira, from Madeira to Brazil, their charts connected the lands with a thin red thread that matched the colour of their cross. When Pedro Alvarez Cabral sailed west in 1500, he crossed that line unknowingly. Yet on his sails, the emblem of the order glowed like a compass, as if guiding him toward the destiny the treaty had drawn. The monks of Tomar kept their silence, but in their vaults they recorded everything. To them, Tordesillas was not the end of exploration, but its true beginning. The earth had been mapped, and the heavens had answered. The meridian had become a scar across the world, yet also a reminder that all divisions are illusions. They believed one day the line would fade, that faith and knowledge would meet again, united as they once were in the temple. Until then, they would guard the secret geometry of the earth, reading in every chart, every voyage, and every treaty the handwriting of the divine. In the heart of Évora, behind the white walls of the Church of St. Francis, there is a doorway few tourists enter lightly. Over it, written in Latin, are the words, "We bones that are here await yours." Step inside, and the light dims. The air thickens with the scent of dust and candle smoke. All around, the walls are made not of brick or marble, but of bone. Skulls stare from their sockets, femurs cross like beams, ribs form arches, and silence hums like a hymn. They call it the Chapel of Bones, a place built to remind the living of death. But for those who know the history of the Order of Christ, it is something more. Beneath its macabre beauty lies a code, a hidden genealogy carved not on parchment but on remains. The chapel was built in the 16th century by Franciscan monks, or so the story goes, yet the design bears the unmistakable touch of older hands. The geometry is precise, almost Templar. The bones are arranged in patterns that mirror the ratios of sacred architecture, spirals and stars that echo the designs of Tomar. In one corner, a Latin inscription plays as a pun, but its letters conceal a sequence of numbers corresponding to the years of Templar exile and rebirth. Another reads, in sanguine vita, in ossibus memoria, in blood life, in bone memory. It is both prayer and cipher. Many believe the chapel served as a secret record for the descendants of the Brotherhood, a genealogical archive disguised as memento mori. Each cluster of bones, marked with small symbols, crosses, stars, tiny carved bees, might represent families or initiates of the order who had carried the hidden lineage forward through generations. When sunlight enters through the high window, it strikes a single skull above the altar, illuminating a faint red cross etched into its surface. No record mentions who it belonged to, but local lore calls it the skull of the navigator. Others whisper it belonged to a prior of Tomar, who chose to hide his knowledge in death rather than in books. The chapel's ceiling, painted in ochre and blue, shows angels holding instruments of navigation rather than the traditional emblems of passion. Compasses, astrolabes, and hourglasses float among clouds, as if heaven itself were mapped by mariners of the soul. Even the placement of the bones tells a story. The older remains, darker with age, form the foundation, while lighter ones trace ascending spirals toward the dome, symbolizing resurrection through knowledge. Historians often dismiss such readings as superstition, but the symbols remain too deliberate to ignore. The monks who tended this place called it a meditation on mortality, yet they also called it the House of Memory. Perhaps they meant more than human remembrance. The bones hum softly when the wind passes through the cracks, a low whisper that sounds almost like chant. It is said that at midnight, the echoes of footsteps rise from the floor, as if the walls themselves breathe. Maybe they do, maybe they remember. In Evora, death was never an ending. It was the final archive, the last refuge of a secret written in bone. The year was 1536, when the Inquisition came to Tomar. The sky was heavy with smoke from summer fires, and rumours moved faster than the wind. Whispers spread through taverns and monasteries alike that the old faith of the Templars had never truly died, that behind the walls of the Convento de Cristo, a hidden brotherhood still kept its midnight vows. The Holy Office came with lanterns and ledgers, searching not for heretics of flesh, but heretics of memory. The Inquisitor who led them carried a single brass lantern etched with a cross, its light said to reveal deceit. He arrived at sunset, his robes smelling of wax and ash. Behind him came scribes, guards, and firewood. They began their search in the library. The monks watched silently as hands that claimed to serve God opened drawers, scattered manuscripts, and tore bindings from sacred books. The Inquisitor demanded records of the Order of Christ, their lineage, their wealth, their correspondence. The librarian, an old man named Fray Lorenzo, bowed and obeyed. He brought forth ledgers and scrolls, though not all of them. What he offered were copies, decoys written in plain script. The true ones, the ones written in cipher and hidden beneath layers of prayer, he had already concealed behind false walls and inside hollowed books. Still, the Inquisitor's lantern glowed across parchment and dust, and suspicion grew. One by one, the ledgers were condemned. They were said to contain traces of forbidden geometry, symbols too close to those of the Templars. That night, The courtyard became an altar of flame, books burned in tall piles, their pages curling like wings. The monks stood in silence, their faces lit by the fire that devoured their history. Only Lorenzo moved. He walked close to the flames, studying each falling ash, as if memorizing what the fire destroyed. His eyes reflected both sorrow and purpose. He knew that what was burned was not lost. Memory, he believed, was stronger than fire. In the days that followed, the Inquisitor continued his search, convinced that the heresy hid in numbers, not words. He ordered every chart, map, and celestial table examined. When they found drawings of stars aligned with altars, they called it sorcery. When they found notes linking feast days to eclipses, they called it heresy. By the week's end, even the walls were scraped, searching for hidden marks. When they left, Tomar was quiet again, its library half empty, its monks hollow-eyed. But, beneath the silence, the work continued. In secret, Lorenzo began to rewrite the lost ledgers from memory. Page by page, by the light of a single candle, he restored what the fire had taken. He died years later with ink-stained hands, his ashes buried beneath the library floor. When restorers reopened Tomar's archives centuries later, they found faint handwriting etched into the wood beneath the shelves. Lines of Latin, barely visible, repeating one phrase again and again. Lux non ardet, light does not burn. The scent of salt and smoke filled the air of Belém, where the Tagus widened into the sea. In the shadow of the monastery that guarded Portugal's golden age, a quiet figure worked by candlelight in a room filled with bottles and stars. His name was Diogo Rodrigues, though sailors called him the alchemist of Belém. He was no magician, though his craft seemed like sorcery to those who watched. He served as royal apothecary to King Manuel, blending medicines and pigments for maps and manuscripts. But his true passion was ink, and not just any ink, but the kind that could endure the sea. He had seen too many charts ruined by salt water and storms, the lines of entire worlds lost to the tide, so he began his experiments. In his small chamber near the docks, he distilled seawater, soot, crushed lapis, and oil pressed from poppy seeds. He mixed them under starlight, believing the heavens blessed what was made in their reflection. His journals, still preserved in fragments, described the night he found his formula. He wrote that as he stirred the ink, lightning flashed over the river, and a blue flame flickered along his window ledge. The sailors who saw it called it St. Elmo's fire, the ghostly light that clings to masts during storms, a sign of protection for those who cross dangerous waters. Diogo took it as an omen. From that night forward, every batch of ink he made was begun with a prayer to St. Elmo, the patron of sailors and light. The recipe itself became a ritual. Each ingredient corresponded to a celestial body. Mercury for movement, carbon for shadow, salt for endurance, and gold dust for divine illumination. He wrote his invocations in Latin around the rims of the jars, sealing them not with wax, but with a cross of ink drawn from the mixture itself. The result was unlike anything seen before. The ink glowed faintly under moonlight, as if touched by the sea. When the royal cartographers tested it, they found that even after months at sea, the markings did not fade. Water rolled off the parchment, as if repelled by unseen hands. It was said that Vasco da Gama's final maps were written with this ink, the stars of the southern sky traced by Diogo's luminous formula. Sailors whispered that as long as the ink remained dark, their ship would find its way home. But the alchemist's work was not only chemistry. Hidden in his notes were fragments of a prayer that read like a code. Between the words of devotion to St. Elmo, he wrote of stars aligned with altars, of compasses blessed by flame, of the old symbols of the Order of Christ reappearing in light and water. He knew he was blending more than pigment. He was blending faith and science, memory and navigation. When he died, his tools were sealed in the monastery, his recipe lost. But even now, when the sea glows blue beneath a storm and sailors whisper St. Elmo's name, some say his ink still writes on the surface of the waves, spelling prayers the tide cannot erase. The Atlantic is never silent around the Azores. The wind hums through the volcanic peaks, and the sea drums against the black cliffs like an ancient heartbeat. In the 16th century, long before cables and telegraphs, a strange network pulsed across these islands, carrying messages faster than ships could sail. Fires burned on mountain tops, flickering through fog and distance, and though the church called them miracles of light, the brothers of the Order of Christ knew better. They were not miracles. They were messages. The islands of Pico, Fayal, São Jorge, and Terceira formed a chain of watchtowers rising from the sea. At their highest points, stone platforms were built, each one aligned carefully with the next. During the day, they used polished mirrors and smoke. At night, fire. The signals could cross hundreds of miles of ocean in moments. To most, it looked like devotion, lights lit in honor of saints or lost sailors. But the timing was too precise. The intervals between flashes followed a rhythm, almost musical. In truth, the system was an early form of coded communication, a network built by navigators who understood that the ocean itself could be both enemy and ally. The order had developed these methods quietly, adapting ideas from Moorish astronomy and ancient Greek beacons. They called it the silent line. Each island carried one keeper, a monk sailor who tended the flame and watched the horizon. His job was simple but sacred, to keep the chain unbroken. A flash from Fayal meant a fleet had left Lisbon. 2 flashes from Pico meant they had reached Madeira. A steady, burning light meant danger, storms, or enemies. The signals guided traders, warned of pirates, and relayed the movements of royal convoys long before letters could arrive. Sailors learned to read the sea not just through stars and waves, but through these pulses of light. Local villagers told stories of angels walking the peaks, carrying lanterns to guide ships home. They did not know that those angels were men of the order, cloaked and silent, sworn to secrecy. The church grew suspicious. Reports reached Lisbon of strange fires seen during fog, of light that moved as if alive. Some priests declared them omens, signs of the end times. The Inquisition even sent inspectors, but they found only volcanoes and empty altars. The true system remained invisible, its code known only to a handful of brothers and navigators. When the great fleets of India and Brazil crossed these waters, the signals watched them pass, invisible threads tying the empire together. As centuries passed, the network faded, replaced by flags and cannons, then by wires and machines. But on clear nights, locals still climb the peaks and light fires for tradition. They say the fog glows in answer, as if the old code still lingers in the mist. Perhaps it does. Perhaps somewhere in that silence, between sea and sky, the Order's message still moves, a whisper of flame across the Atlantic, carrying word that the light endures. When the Templars first took their vows, they promised poverty, obedience, and protection for pilgrims. Centuries later, when their name had changed and their swords had turned into trade routes, those vows still lived, rewritten for a new world. What had once been faith in stone fortresses became faith in ships and markets. The Order of Christ, born from the ashes of the temple, built more than churches. They built a secret rule of commerce. It was a constitution unwritten, yet deeply known, a code that guided merchants and mariners across oceans. It began quietly in the 15th century, when Portuguese ships first carried spices from the east and gold from Africa. Behind every ledger stood a monk trained not in theology but in mathematics. These brothers believed that trade itself could be sacred if governed by justice. They wrote that profit without fairness was theft, and that every port, no matter how far, must be a place of refuge. The rule was simple: fair weights, fair measures, safe harbours, and sanctuary for strangers. This was not a law of kings or popes, but of conscience, enforced through the invisible hand of the order. Every merchant who bore the red cross on his chest followed it, even if he did not know its origin. The order's archives in Tomar held ledgers marked with strange symbols. A triangle for truth, a circle for mercy, and a square for balance. These were not decorations but markers for transactions approved by the Brotherhood. A shipmaster who broke the code might find his contracts void, his cargo unblessed. For centuries this hidden system kept peace where royal law could not reach. In the harbours of Goa, in the markets of Bahia, and in the alleys of Lisbon, the same quiet fairness prevailed. Even pirates knew to spare ships that bore the cross of the order, for they carried more than goods, they carried trust. The brothers believed that trade was another form of pilgrimage, a journey not only for wealth but for understanding. They saw merchants as modern knights, crossing oceans not with lances but with ledgers, building bridges between cultures. When famine struck coastal towns, the order opened granaries before the crown ordered it. When storms wrecked fleets, the first aid came not from soldiers but from merchants who lived by the secret rule. Many of them were descendants of the old Templars, their heritage hidden under generations of commerce and silence. Over time, the rule was absorbed into Portuguese maritime law, though no one remembered where it began. But in old ledgers, tucked between lists of cargo and coin, phrases in Latin still appear. Pax permissem, peace through trade. To the world it was economics. To the order it was theology. They believed that the market could be as holy as the monastery if built on honesty and care. Long after the last knight was buried, their creed survived not in armour but in agreement, a vow whispered in every exchange of hands, binding the world together, one act of fairness at a time. By the middle of the 16th century, the Convento de Cristo in Tomar had changed again. Its walls still breathed the memory of the Templars, but now new footsteps echoed through its cloisters. The Jesuits had arrived. Founded by Ignatius of Loyola in 1540, the Society of Jesus spread across Europe with sharp minds and disciplined hearts. They came as teachers, confessors, and scholars. Yet behind their books and sermons, they carried a quiet fascination with the very order that the Church had once erased. To the Jesuits, the Templars were both warning and inspiration. The monks of Tomar watched as black robes replaced white mantles and Latin hymns filled the same halls where knights had once armed for crusade. The Jesuits catalogued everything. They opened the libraries, restored the archives, and copied every surviving manuscript. Officially, they said it was for preservation. Unofficially, they studied the codes. Within the margins of old Templar texts, they found strange symbols and geometric diagrams, circles nested in triangles, stars inscribed with Hebrew letters. The Jesuits called them mnemonics of silence, methods for remembering divine truth without words. In their own schools, they began to use these same patterns to train memory and logic. What had once been secret Templar meditation became Jesuit pedagogy. In Lisbon and Coimbra, scholars mapped theology like constellations, each idea connected by invisible lines. They spoke of divine architecture, of knowledge structured like the heavens. Many of these ideas had been whispered in Tomar long before. Some brothers of the Order of Christ welcomed the Jesuits as allies. Others saw them as rivals, cloaked in humility. The two orders shared corridors, but rarely prayers. At night, the Jesuits studied by candlelight, their shadows long against the walls. In the silence, they copied symbols from Templar stones, trying to translate their meaning. They believed that within those designs lay a universal grammar of faith, a bridge between reason and mystery. Some called it dangerous, others called it genius. The Inquisition watched closely, yet the Jesuits were too valuable, their learning too useful to silence. So the Church allowed them to continue, unaware that in studying the Templars, the Jesuits were slowly becoming them. The discipline of secrecy, the coded communication, the layered meanings of ritual, all these they absorbed. Even their global missions carried echoes of the old Crusades, though now the weapon was education instead of war. In Tomar, a few elderly monks smiled quietly. They recognized the pattern repeating itself. History moving in circles, knowledge changing robes but never dying. When the Jesuits finally left Portugal for their missions abroad, they carried with them fragments of what they had learned here. The symbols carved into their lecture halls, the methods of reflection they taught their students, even the way they structured their libraries, all traced back to the silent halls of the Templars. The flame had passed again, this time hidden in ink and intellect. The vow of silence had become the art of memory, and the fortress of faith had become a university of light. It was the morning of November 1st, 1755, when Lisbon awoke to prayer and ended in ruin. Bells rang for All Saints' Day, and the scent of wax and incense filled the churches. Then the ground began to shake. Walls groaned, towers split, and in an instant the city became a storm of falling stone. From the hills to the river, the sound was like thunder that would not stop. The great cathedrals crumbled, their domes collapsing into clouds of dust. People ran into the streets, only to find the cobblestones rippling like waves. When it was over, silence lasted only seconds. Then the sea roared. The Tagus River withdrew as if inhaling, then returned as a wall of water, sweeping ships into the upper streets. Fire followed next. Candles spilled, oil lamps burst, and soon the city burned. Amid the chaos, a small group of men moved through the smoke. They were brothers of the Order of Christ, keepers of an archive hidden within a sacristy near São Vicente de Fora. Inside that room lay centuries of memory, charters, charts, secret correspondence from Tomar, and a set of manuscripts said to trace the unbroken line from the Templars to the present. As the church cracked and the roof began to fall, the brothers worked quickly. They wrapped the parchments in oilcloth, placed them in a cedar chest, and sealed it with wax bearing the cross of the order. One man carried a lantern, though the flame trembled with every shock. They moved as if guided by something more than instinct. Outside, the air was thick with ash and heat. Streets that had once led to the harbour were gone, swallowed by fire. But they knew the way. They passed through ruins, stepping over statues and shattered glass, their robes streaked with soot. Around them the city screamed, yet they spoke only in short prayers. Near the Tagus, they found the quay half submerged. A small boat, loosened by the waves, rocked against a pillar. They lowered the chest into it and climbed aboard just as another tremor split the stones behind them. The boat drifted with the current, flames reflecting in the black water. One brother looked back and whispered that the city was dying like a saint in fire and silence. The chest floated toward the middle of the river, away from the heat. They rowed toward the far bank, where the air was clearer and the hills still stood. By nightfall the brothers reached safety. They buried the chest beneath the ruins of an old chapel upriver, marking the spot with nothing more than a carved circle on the wall. Days later, when soldiers searched for survivors, they found no trace of the chest, only that faint mark. The archive vanished into legend. Some say it was later moved to Tomar, others that it still sleeps by the Tagus, waiting. But what the earthquake destroyed, the brothers preserved. Amid the fire and the tide, memory crossed the water and lived. High above the cliffs of Setúbal, hidden behind fig trees and salt-stained stone, stands a hermitage so small it barely appears on maps. Its whitewashed walls are cracked, its wooden door bleached by centuries of Sunday. But step inside, and the silence changes. The air grows cooler, heavy with the scent of old lime and sea air. Across every wall, from floor to ceiling, stretch panels of blue and white tile, each one shimmering like the surface of water. At first glance, they seem like simple azulejos, the kind that decorate chapels across Portugal. But look closer, and something stirs beneath the glaze. The panels are not saints and miracles, they are maps. The coastline of Africa winds across one wall, the curve of Brazil stretches across another. Ships sail through clouds that double as halos, their sails painted with red crosses. The hermitage is a gospel of ocean and compass, devotion written in cobalt blue. Local fishermen call it the House of the Navigator's Prayer. No one knows who built it or when. Some say it was raised by sailors who survived a storm and vowed to give thanks. Others whisper it was built by monks of the Order of Christ who needed a place to hide their charts in plain sight. Each panel tells a story that blurs the line between voyage and vision. In one, a caravel sails beneath a moon that doubles as the face of the Virgin. In another, a storm curls like a dragon, yet its eye forms the shape of a cross. Along the borders, faint inscriptions in Latin run like tide marks. Some read like prayers, others are coordinates. When scholars studied the tiles in the 19th century, they noticed that the designs matched routes known only to early explorers. The proportions were too precise to be decoration. Each saintly figure faced a direction of wind. Each angel pointed toward a harbour. Even the waves seemed to curl in patterns that marked hidden reefs. It was not art, it was instruction. The hermitage was a coded chart disguised as worship. The artists, likely brothers of the order, used their craft as camouflage. During times when the church forbade private navigation charts, the brothers painted their maps as sacred murals. No one would dare confiscate something that looked like scripture, and so the secrets of the sea survived in tile and colour. When the sun strikes the panels at dawn, the blue deepens to indigo, and the ships seem to move. The room fills with light, as if the ocean itself has entered. Locals still light candles here before voyages. They whisper not to saints, but to sailors who carried the faith on their sails. The hermitage remains unmarked by guides and unknown to most tourists. Only those who listen to the wind at the cliff's edge find it. There, between prayer and pilotage, between devotion and design, the old order still speaks in blue light, turning geography into gospel and navigation into praise. Tomar has always kept its secrets in stone. The Convento de Cristo rises above the town like a fortress frozen in prayer, its arches and cloisters whispering stories to anyone patient enough to listen. Among the tourists and caretakers, one man listens differently. His name is Duarte Mendez, an engineer by trade, a skeptic by nature, and lately, something else. He has spent years studying the convento, not as a monument, but as a machine. To him, its walls are gears, its windows apertures, its shadows a clock no one remembers how to read. Every day he measures the play of sunlight on the old stones, noting how the beams shift from arch to arch. It began as curiosity, but soon patterns emerged. The light in Tomar did not fall randomly. It moved with purpose. In the round church, a narrow slit above the altar admits a single shaft of sun that travels across the walls, like a hand writing in gold. By mid-year, Duarte noticed that beam meets a carved emblem hidden behind a column, a cross within a circle, the old Templar seal. He traced its alignment through maps and blueprints and realized that the geometry stretched beyond the church. It connected doorways, towers, even fountains, as if the entire complex was designed to track not just time, but revelation. The clue came from a half-forgotten manuscript in the town archive, a note scribbled by a friar in 1723. It mentioned a day of light when stone becomes scripture. The date was June 24th, St. John's Day, once sacred to both Templars and Masons. Duarte decided to test it. At noon, when the bells began to toll, he stood in the courtyard of the Claustro Principal. The sun blazed high, and shadows gathered in perfect symmetry. Then it happened. A beam of light slipped through a window in the round church, passed across the nave, and struck a small door at the far end of the corridor. The door's carvings glowed for a moment, revealing lines he had never seen before. They formed a star, 8-pointed, the same symbol found in ancient Templar maps. Duarte pushed the door. It opened not to a hidden chamber, but to a small alcove, empty except for an inscription carved deep into the stone. It read in Latin, Lux custodit pactum. Light keeps the vow. He stood silent, the meaning unfolding slowly. The convento was not just a monument. It was a calendar of faith, built to remind those who watched the heavens that their vow still lived. When Duarte stepped outside, the bells were still ringing. He looked down at the town, at the river curling below, at the shadows shifting across the walls. For the first time, he understood what the Templars had built, a place where time and light met in covenant. The world might forget their name, but as long as the sun rose over Tomar, their vow would keep shining. History tells us the Knights Templar ended in 1312, dissolved by papal decree and scattered to the winds. But walk through Portugal and you begin to doubt that ending. The cross of the order still crowns churches, glows from ships carved in stone, and decorates coins that pass from hand to hand. Every symbol hums with quiet persistence, as if the order never truly vanished, only changed language. Their story did not survive as men in armour. It survived as a pattern, a grammar built into the very landscape. The castles along the Tagus are not ruins. They are punctuation marks in a sentence written in granite and faith. Each fortress, each chapel, aligns with another, like words forming a code of roots and rites. To the untrained eye, it looks like geography. To those who listen, it reads like liturgy. The Templars once vowed to guard pilgrims on the road to Jerusalem. After their exile, that road shifted west, and Portugal became their new scripture. Here they guarded not travellers, but ideas. The Order of Christ became their new vessel, carrying the same spirit across the seas. Every caravel that left Lisbon's harbour bore a red cross on its sails, a silent signature of continuity. Through those voyages, the Order wrote its final testament, not in Latin, but in latitude. The empire that grew from those sails was not just political conquest. It was a cartography of remembrance, the world remade through the compass of their vow. Yet, their legacy did not belong only to kings and captains. It seeped into craftsmen, sailors, architects, the masons who built monasteries, the pilots who charted winds, the scribes who marked unknown shores with crosses. All were speaking the same language, even if they had forgotten its origin. Look at the stones of Tomar, at Belem's arches, at the tiles of hidden chapels. You can still read it. Circles nested in squares, crosses within stars, suns that rise through cloisters in perfect alignment. These are not decorations, they are syntax. Each design says the same thing, that knowledge is sacred, that faith travels, that vows endure. The Templars may have been burned, their leaders condemned, their name erased from papal rolls, but their grammar remained. Portugal carried it like breath, hidden in art, architecture, and the rhythm of discovery. Even the language of the sea holds their echo. The words used by navigators, almirante, piloto, rota, were first spoken by men who once prayed as monks and fought as knights. In every tide that laps against the fortress of Tomar, the vow still murmurs. The order ended on paper, but not in practice. It became memory given form, a discipline of balance between the sword and the compass, between heaven and horizon. So, when the sun rises over the round church and lights the old cross once more, it is not resurrection. It is reminder. The Templars were never gone. They became the stone beneath every step, the pattern in every map, the silence that still guards the edge of the sea.